Now we're going to get down to the nitty-gritty of what Indians are all about.
I still say we Indian people are believers in the truth. This is the way of life that was given to your people. You're born an Indian, you're going to die an Indian. Indianness is a good life. You're facing an Indian this afternoon.
And good Saturday afternoon out there, everyone. Welcome to Native News Today. I'm your host, Jason Salzman, from here in the Muscogee Media Studios. Got a special treat for you folks today as we sort of wrapped up production early this week. Wanted to take a break before we get back into the brunt of our election coverage coming up with our national council seats and show you some of our archived material that is extremely popular here at the Muscogee Media Archive section of our video section there. So this is Folklore of the Muscogee, everything you need to know about Muscogee Creek culture. We hope you enjoy.
What is it, dear?
I can't sleep.
You must try. I promised your mom and dad you'd be in bed early.
But Grandma, I could go to sleep much faster if you tell me a story.
All right, maybe just one.
Thanks, Grandma.
Would you like to hear the one about where the Creek people came from?
Yeah, I like that one.
I'm glad you like those stories. I want you to learn them so you can tell them to your grandchildren when you grow old. Now, let's see. How does that one begin? Oh, yes. Our elders say that the Mvskoke people...
That scene is repeated 1,000 times every day in cultures all over the world. It is one of the ways a culture is preserved and transmitted to live on in the lives of a group of people. My people, the Creek Indians, have many such stories to tell, stories that are passed on from generation to generation. As a Native American and a professor of speech at Northeastern State University in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, I have a special appreciation for the spoken word. These traditional Creek stories, or folklore, constitute the literature of an Indian nation and serve an important function within our culture. Together now, we are going to sample that literature as we share the folklore of the Muscogee Creek people. The traditional stories of Indian people serve several purposes within the life of the tribe. Grandparents amuse their grandchildren with magical tales of animals and people who inhabited the ancient world, while passing on an important cultural trait. And storytellers pass down oral legends and tribal histories to succeeding generations. Today, we can examine these stories more easily by dividing them into three main types: legends, myths, and fables. Our first story is a good example of a legend. Legends are oral traditions that teach national history, formal codes of conduct, and even tribal law. These stories seem to be most accurately preserved through time, although there may be variations on all folklore. The following legend, called The Origin of Clans, is narrated by Susanna Factor, coordinator of the Creek Bilingual Program of the Holdenville Public Schools. It was illustrated by Creek artist and fashion designer Phyllis Fife, who has used a style reminiscent of designs found on ancient Muscogee engraved shells.
It is told by our elders that in the beginning the Muscogee people were born out of the earth itself. They crawled up out of the ground through a hole like ants. In those days, they lived in the far western land beside tall mountains that reached the sky. They called the mountains the backbone of the earth. Then a thick fog descended upon the earth, sent by the master of breath, Mvskoke. The Muscogee people could not see. They wandered around blindly, calling to one another in fear. They drifted apart and became lost. The whole people were separated into smaller groups, and the people in these groups stayed close to one another in fear of being entirely alone. Finally, the Master had mercy on them. From the eastern edge of the world, where the sun rises, he began to blow away the fog. He blew and blew until the fog was completely gone. The people were joyful and sang a hymn of thanksgiving to the Master of Breath. And in each group the people turned to one another and swore eternal brotherhood. They said that from then on these groups would be like large families. The members of each group would be as close to each other as brother and sister, father and son. The group that was farthest east and first to see the sun praised the wind that had blown the fog away. They called themselves the Wind Family or Wind Clan, and as the fog moved away from the other groups, they too gave themselves names. Each group chose the name of the first animal it saw, so they became the bear, the deer, the alligator, the raccoon, and the bird clan. But the Wind Clan remained the most important of all.
In the beginning, there was no land. Water covered all the earth below. So a great sky council was called to see if the world can be made into a good place to live. The eagle was chosen as leader of the council. He said, "Let us send someone down to the world to find earth from which we can make land. Who will go?" The crawfish stepped forward and said, "I will go down to search for the land." The council agreed to send the crawfish. But the eagle warned, "You shall have only 4 days to find earth, when you must return to the sky council." So the crawfish went down into the waters below. He swam around in the waters for 3 days, but could find no land. Finally, on the 4th day, the crawfish said, "I must take one last look before returning to the sky." So he dived as hard as he could down to the depths of the water. There he struck something. It was earth. He began to stir up the mud with his tail. He collected some of the mud in his claws and piled it up high above the water. So on the evening of the 4th day, the crawfish returned to the sky council. There he stood before all the creatures of the council and revealed to them the wet earth that he had found below. The council was greatly pleased with the discovery of land, but they saw that it was salt. They asked, "Who will spread out the land and make it dry and hard?" The eagle stepped into the middle of the council square and said, "I will go below and spread out the land and dry it." So the mighty eagle spread out his long wings and flew above the earth. As he soared over the land, it began to spread out and dry. After a long while, though, he grew tired of holding out his wings, and he began to flap them. As he flapped them, he caused the hills and valleys to form because the dirt was still soft. But soon the lands were dry enough for the animals to live on, and the migration from the sky to the earth began.
When the world was still new, people had no way to warm themselves or heat their food. They were cold in the winter and hungry all the time because their uncooked food did not taste good. One night, the Master of Breath took pity on them and caused a bright glow to appear in the sky. The light grew brighter and brighter. Suddenly, small objects shot out of the sky and fell to the ground. The people rushed over to find out what the bright objects were. One Indian brave found two of the glowing objects lying next to each other on the ground. They were small rocks. As he picked them up, the pain of the heat caused him to drop them. As they hit the ground, one rock struck the other, causing a spark to fly. The spark caught the grass on fire and it began to spread. At first, the Indian was frightened by what he saw and felt. But the Master of Breath spoke to him and told him not to be afraid. The Master explained that the rocks were sacred and were to be used to warm the people and cook their food. Then the other Indians gathered around the fire as it burned brightly in the night sky. They felt it warm their cold bodies. Then the Indian spoke and said, "This fire is good. It has been sent to us by the Master of Breath to warm our houses, cook our food, and light our councils. You must remember that the fire is sacred and must be kept alive always." Then he said, "Tonight we will hold council together, and when we are finished, each woman will be given an ember from the fire to take to her home to start her home fire. Each year at this time, put out the old fire in your home and clean out the ashes. Then you must return to this council ground and receive a new fire to take to your homes." And from that night, when the sacred rocks fell from the sky, Indian people have had fire to cook their food, warm their homes, and light their councils. Once upon a time, there was an old lady who was gifted for making bread. Everyone far and near knew of her talent. Each day, she wore a black dress, a white apron, and a red scarf tied around her head. One day, an old man came to her house. He said to the old woman, "I have walked many miles and I am very tired. May I rest and get bread and water before I continue my journey?" The old lady said, "Yes, you may sit here on the porch and rest while I go in and cook some bread." She went in the house and got the fire started to bake bread, even though she had very little flour. As soon as the oven was hot, she put the bread in the pan and placed it in the oven. The bread was soon done, and when she took it out, she noticed that it had cooked perfectly. She thought to herself, "This bread is too nice to give to an old man. I will keep the bread for myself." So she fixed another loaf and placed it in the oven. When it was done, the bread looked even better than the first loaf, and she decided to keep it too. She placed the third loaf in the oven. When this was done, it appeared to be even better than the first 2 loaves she baked. She finally decided that she did not have any bread to give away to strangers. She went outside and told the old man that she had been mistaken and had no bread to share with him after all. The old man knew that she was not telling the truth because he was really Mvskoke, the master of breath, and he had been testing her. Suddenly he threw off his old coat to show his true identity. Then the master said to her, "Something bad is going to happen to you today because you would not share your bread." He stomped his foot on the ground and the old lady's body began to shrink. She cried out, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I will share my bread with you." But he stomped his foot again and she began changing into a bird. Her arms turned to wings. Her black dress turned into black feathers. The white apron turned to white feathers, and the red scarf changed into red feathers. The master of breath said to the old woman, "Because you have lied to me, from this day forward, you and your descendants will have to peck wood to get your food." Therefore, the Creek elders say, it is good to share your food with strangers, even though you have very little.
The following fable is a typical trickster tale called Rabbit Gets Wisdom. The story was illustrated by Creek artist Carol Fife Stewart and is told by Susanna once again.
Rabbit was very unhappy with himself, so he went to Mvskoke, the master of breath, and asked him for wisdom. He said, "I haven't much sense and would like for you to give me more." So the master gave Rabbit a sack and told him to fill it with red ants. "Fill it," he said, "and I will teach you sense." The master thought that if he did not have any sense, he couldn't get one ant into the sack. So Rabbit went to the ant hill and said, "The great master has been saying that you could not fill this sack, but I said you could. What do you think?" The ants were very anxious to show that they could do so, and all went in, whereupon Rabbit tied it up and carried it to the master. "I have done as you told me," said Rabbit. "Now give me knowledge." But the master said, "First, there is something else you must do. There is a big rattlesnake over yonder. If you bring him here, I will impart you some knowledge." He thought if the rabbit was really ignorant, he would not know what to do. Rabbit went off with a plan in mind to find the snake. First, he cut a long straight stick and made one end sharp. When he found the snake, he said, "The master says you are not as long as this stick, but I say you are longer." The snake replied, "Well, I think I am longer. Go ahead and measure me." So the snake straightened out, and Rabbit measured him by laying the stick beside him with the sharp end toward his head. As Rabbit was doing so, he ran the point of the stick into the snake's head and killed him. He carried the rattlesnake back to the master on the end of the stick. The master looked pleased and said, "Now I have one last task for you. There is an alligator not too far from here. Bring him to me, and I will give you wisdom." So Rabbit went to the lake and called out, "Alligator, Alligator Harjo, come out. I must speak to you." Alligator poked his head above the water in the middle of the lake and asked, "What's the matter?" Rabbit answered, "An ox has been killed for the master to eat, and they want you to get some timbers for the scaffold on which to roast it." So Alligator came out of the water and followed Rabbit. Before they had gone far, Rabbit turned around and struck Alligator with a club. The alligator ran for the lake with Rabbit close behind, beating him all the way. Alligator slid safely back into the water. Rabbit left to go think over what he would do next. In a little while, he went back to the lake and called to Alligator once more. "Alligator Harjo! Alligator Harjo!" Alligator came up in the middle of the lake and as before said, "What is it?" Rabbit cleverly said, "Mvskoke the rabbit was sent here some time ago, and nothing has been seen of him since. Do you know what happened to him?" Alligator suspiciously answered that someone had come to him with such a story and had beaten him. Rabbit spoke, saying, "We thought he might have done something of that sort, for he is a mean kind of person. We told him to ask you to bring the forked timbers to roast an ox. When he didn't come back, I was sent to find out what happened." Upon hearing that explanation, Alligator came out of the water, and again they set off together. And as they went along, Rabbit said, "That Mvskoke is very bad. We should not have sent him. Did he beat you very badly?" "He beat me a great deal," said Alligator, "but he did not hit a dangerous place." Then Rabbit slyly asked, "If he had hit you in a dangerous spot, what would have happened?" "It would have killed me," said Alligator. "Well, where would Mvskoke have had to hit you to hurt you?" Rabbit asked. Alligator replied, "If he had struck me across the hips, it would have finished me." And so, having learned what he wanted to know, Rabbit presently struck Alligator across the hips and laid him out dead. Then he picked him up and took him to his Mvskoke on the sea. When the master saw that Rabbit had completed the final task, he said, "You already have more wisdom than I could ever impart to you." And he told Rabbit to leave him and trouble him no more.
It seems that Rabbit did get wisdom, but he was outsmarted in the process. Our final sample of Muscogee Creek folklore is actually a collection of short tales illustrated by Indian artist Tommy Steinsick. These stories focus on what the Creek people call the little people. Many stories are told about these helpful and fun-loving little ones who seem to be much like the leprechauns of Ireland. Woodrow Haney tells these tales for us.
My grandmother, a Creek medicine woman, told me much about the little people. It's the Mvskoke. They live in the woods. In summertime, they live in pine trees and the tree of the mistletoe. When winter comes, they keep warm by moving into the squirrel's nest. For food, the little people mostly eat berries. In the summertime, they love to eat kipala, strawberries. They also enjoy eating possum grapes and silawa, or black huckleberries. The Mvskoke do not have a stomp ground of their own for holding traditional ceremonies. So, after the human-sized people end their ceremonial season, the little people hold their puskida, or green corn dance. The Mvskoke love to play tricks on human-sized people and are often blamed for hiding misplaced objects. One morning at the stomp ground, a man was washing himself. He laid down his soap and towel near the water. But while he was washing his face, some little people moved the towel to a nearby rock. Then they ran behind a cedar tree and had a good time laughing at the trick they had played on the man. When the man had finished washing himself, he pulled out his clean clothes. He laid down the clothes on the bench and turned around to drink his coffee. While he was turned around, the Mvskoke grabbed his clothes and ran towards the woods with them. When the man turned around, he saw his clothes making a fast getaway towards the trees. He did not see the little people under his clothes, and by the time he caught up to his shirt, the Mvskoke had disappeared into the woods. It is said that the little people do not like dogs. One morning, an Indian man and his dogs went hunting in the woods. As they passed by the trees where the little people made their home, a little medicine man saw them coming. He picked up a blade of dead grass and prepared himself to shoot the man. As soon as the hunter was near enough, the medicine man shot him in the back with the dead grass. That is why a hunter sometimes may feel a sharp pain when he is in the woods. These are some of the tales told about the little people.
The next time you misplace something and can't find it, remember that the little people probably moved it and are off somewhere having a good laugh about it. And that concludes our visit with the little people, Rabbit, Terrapin, and the others. As you've seen, Creek Folklore is a rich and imaginative body of literature. And this collection is merely a sample. You can find others in your local library. I hope you've enjoyed these tales as much as we've enjoyed sharing them with you, for it is through sharing that our culture lives. And as we say in the Muscogee language, Medo. Thank you.